Hello and welcome to this Iconicon live stream. I'm Conrad, co-host of Movie Oubliette, the podcast where we talk about films that some people may have forgotten, but nobody has forgotten the film we're going to talk about today. My co-host, Daniel, is fast asleep in bed down there in Australia, so I am very excited to say I'm joined today by Michael of RetroBlasting. Hello, Michael.
Hello, how are you, Conrad?
I'm very well, and I'm very excited to talk Star Trek with you today. Do you want to talk a little bit about RetroBlasting for people who may not know your channel?
Absolutely not. I want to get to these people who have graciously decided to join us for an hour to talk about Star Trek, the motion picture, and I will save my bumper for the end, sir. So,
that's very good of you. So, well, without further ado, let's get straight to the team who have produced the new 4K restoration of the director's edition of Star Trek, the motion picture. We are very excited to be joined by David C. Fein, the producer, Mike Matessino, the post-production supervisor, and Daren Dochterman, the VFX supervisor. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, good morning.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening.
It's very exciting to have you all here. I thought it would be fun to kick off just so everyone can get to know you a little bit more and think about the film, the context that we're talking about. If we could just say a little about what the original motion picture meant to you the first time you saw it. But I can say for myself, just so the audience can calibrate their tastes to me, this is my favorite Star Trek movie. So, David, let's kick off with you. What's your first memory of seeing this movie?
Well, I remember seeing it in New York City, Staten Island, actually, where I was living with my father and my parents. I mean, I was living in New York City. And growing up with classic Star Trek, we used to have to, everyone had to be home by 6 p.m. to watch the classic show. So when it came time to see the motion picture, it was such an event to see it on a giant screen, and the effects upgraded and just so much of an improvement based on what classic Star Trek was in visual style, but it was still the heart of Star Trek. So I was ecstatic to be able to see it on the screen, and it was huge. It was just absolutely huge, and my child mind was thrilled. I just kept, there's my Enterprise, moving it around and studying it from every angle. And it was a massive life-changing experience in just the scope and the story. Didn't really have, the adult understanding of the film. But as a kid, it was amazing. It's absolutely thrilling.
Yeah. How about you, Mike?
I just remember it as being part of this tremendous renaissance of, science fiction, fantasy, cinema, and coming so shortly after Star Wars, even though there had been talk about bringing Star Trek back. It was movies about space and science fiction in the future were here to stay. And it was just a mind-blowing thing to think of this little TV show that we were looking at very fuzzy, faded reruns at the time. And now you're actually going to a movie theater and seeing a big, huge epic and seeing the Enterprise and things that you kind of took for granted and sort of appreciated for their little campiness and wonkiness on the old TV show, and suddenly seeing it taken seriously and that this is a real thing and audiences are going and they're liking it and they're enjoying it and they want to be here. And it just was a great time to have spent one's formative years when, this tremendous renaissance of fantasy cinema was just sort of appearing.
Yeah. How about you, Daren?
I was primed from a couple years before the movie came out by reading Starlog magazine and reading the monthly updates to the production and their troubles and their triumphs and everything that they wanted to share. Because remember, the magazines were our internet back then, and it was a very fun way of being in touch with what was happening. The first time I saw a photo of the new Enterprise, was, I think, in a Scholastic Bananas magazine, and they had a centerfold, a 12-year-old's version of the centerfold of the Enterprise from that back three-quarter view, and I went, "Oh my gosh, this thing is actually real now." It was really amazing. I was floored, and when I finally got to see the film when opening weekend, I was literally gobsmacked. It was amazing. I loved it. I saw it probably about another 10 times that winter, and it was really a boost for not only my fandom but my excitement, and it was all great. And I never lost that feeling for the movie.
No, me neither. I remember seeing it on TV the very first time I watched it, and I think I was just struck by Robert Wise's brand of hard-hitting science fiction. It really gave you that sense of the immensity of space and this unknowable mystery of Vija. And it feels like the only, well, for me, the only Star Trek that really has that sort of effect, and so many things in it just blew my mind conceptually and were such an astonishing experience. I don't know, Michael, how about you?
I grew up with the original Star Trek show before TNG or anything like that, and of course, I loved the films. The Star Trek the Motion Picture entry was special to me because not only did I see the movie by renting it, but I also had the read-along cassette and book, which was the only Star Trek read-along cassette and book I had. I was in love with the refit Enterprise, and I still to this day think it is the most well-designed, beautiful starship ever to be put on film in any fictional capacity. And so I got very familiar with the story of the motion picture thanks to both renting it and the read-along cassette. So yeah, this movie is really important to my rearing, my development as well. Yeah, it showed me that Robert Wise could make anything grand, anything big. He did for space what he did for the hills of Austria. It's a gorgeous movie.
Yeah, he could do everything from
Anyway.
Yeah, he seemed to be able to turn his hand to any genre, because when he tried a horror film, he made a landmark with The Haunting. So he really was just an astonishing filmmaker, a master of his craft. Yeah. But he, as you've alluded to, Daren, there were problems with this production, which meant that there was an opportunity to go back. And this isn't your first time on this particular rodeo. There was the director's edition in 2001 on DVD, which I am very, very proud to own. Could you talk a little bit about why this project was so important then, and why revisiting it now?
Well, when Mike was first working with Robert Wise on various projects, I'll let Mike tell this later, but Robert Wise didn't talk about the film after it was released for many, many years, nearly 18 or 19 years. And he was very upset with the situation that he had been put into. The film did not get any preview screenings. The film basically was just released as is, basically a rough cut, and he was unhappy with that situation, and rightfully so. But he soldiered on, and he did the best that he could bring the team together to do, and they got a release on December 7th, 1979, and fulfilling the Paramount's required release. Charlie Bluhdorn famously said that there will be a film called Star Trek the Motion Picture released on that date. I don't care if there's blank leader in the center of it. It will be released. And so they fulfilled their contractual obligation, and they thought that was that. Of course, there's a lot of retro news about the original release saying that, well, it wasn't very popular. Bunk. It was extremely popular. It made a lot of money. If it hadn't made a lot of money, they would have never made a sequel. Absolutely not.
For adjusted dollars, just on the side here, Motion Picture made the most money of Star Trek up till JJ's 2020. The JJ verse reboot of the series, where everybody was dying for something Star Trek. It was kind of paused there, but for adjusted dollars, it really was the most successful of all of the Star Trek films. 4 was for a while, but it was amazing. It was just absolutely amazing. And to address that, and then it went into the television version, the special longer version. Conrad, I don't know if where you were, they showed the TV. You said you saw it on TV. Whether or not it was the special longer version with the additional scenes put back in that didn't quite fit, but it was more of character and other important pieces that were left out of the film. That the problem too was that Bob was required to have a film that was 130 minutes long, and they were getting in bits and pieces of the effects, and they didn't know how long it would be, so they reduced the film down to the barest edit it could be as well to account for all of that. So the television version was an alteration to the picture that Bob was not involved with. So there were a lot of issues that implied, in order for this film to get closer to what it needed to be originally, and even concepts that were designed for the film had to be abandoned based on time. Like the wing walk scene where it goes to V'ger became a wall of blocks, just a row of just stones that you pulled up to, you parked, and just ran across. It was completely against what the plan was. So Bob also was upset because he always needed a film to be ready when you started and have no problems. And as Daren was saying, the preview screenings, to be able to fine tune it, that's where you would cut bad laughs, a place where it's serious and you laugh. Most notably was, in the transporter room when Kirk would say, "Oh my God." A lot of people thought it was a humorous moment, but people just died. And these are moments that would have been cut had you been able to have a preview screening. So when they did the screening in Washington, D.C., even afterwards, a few days before the release, they wanted to immediately go in it and make further changes. And the studio, fearing that the film would be considered, that it had problems if they made any changes, forced it to remain that way for many years. So the special longer version came out, and then that was somewhat of an improvement, enough that Paramount Home Entertainment made that the new video master. So people, when they were introduced to the film, ended up introduced to the special longer version, which still wasn't Bob's cut. So
I think that we never really codified this specifically, but Bob made 40 movies ultimately, and was not the kind of person to look back really, because he was so good at what he did that he always felt finished. And the movie was the movie, and he was always happy with them. And if they weren't quite right, he just like, we got that wrong, or it was a little off, or whatever. He moved on like a journalist did. But when the 90s came along, suddenly he was asked to be going back a lot. And I sat with him doing new transfers of his movies, and they were widescreen for the first time. In some cases, we pulled out the 65 millimeter, and he was asked to come in and look at them and determine if they were, looking and sounding right, and approving them. So, and then there were behind the scenes things starting. So suddenly, for the first time really in his career, he was being asked to go back and talk about things he'd done years ago. When it came to Star Trek, he just was resistant, because that was the one that just kind of stuck out as being different from all the others, because he had to let it go. And I don't know that we've ever actually said this, because it never came up specifically, but the sort of implied response to the TV cut, which was generated so much mail to Paramount that the studio actually changed their home video release. The implication there was that the movie was better than the one that was released. And if you'd had this conversation with Bob, he probably would have felt very insecure about that. It would have actually just made him feel worse about it. So as time went on through the 90s and we started to see this tendency towards revisiting movies really precipitated by Star Wars, and then it happened with a bunch of others, finally, at the right moment, he spoke up and, said, if there's really a movie where this should have been done or explored, it's Star Trek. And I said, I'm working with guys that agree with you, and I think that if we put our heads together, I think you could really do this. If you want to go to Paramount and propose it, I think we actually really have a shot at it. And he did, and the project happened. It just was had to wait for sort of the right time, but he finally came around, and then when we did do the work and got it done, suddenly he now could be proud of the movie and happy with the movie. And that was, I think, for all of us, the most joyous part of the whole experience, was knowing that we made this man happy with this movie and proud of it.
And that was, I think, the best thing to come out of that, because the release of that on DVD was a double-edged sword. First of all, it was good that we could get all of Mr. Wise's desires for the cut that he wanted, and the additional scenes integrated, and all of that into a package that was viewable and enjoyable. But still, it wasn't a film. It wasn't the film full resolution, full beauty, and full release. And the double-edged sword is, I don't think if we had been given the go-ahead back then, I don't think we would have been able to do as good a job as we did this time. Certainly because of advances in technology and everything. Go ahead, Dave.
You see, the standard definition DVD master, we were given just about enough budget in order to put that together. And even at the time, we knew that it was going to be a proof of concept. And the idea was, let's finish it for standard definition and bring it back to the studio and say, here's that unique experience where you can see so much closer to what our goal was by actually having a movie to hold, look, watch, and view, and experience what we were going for with Bob. And when the film was finished, and again, that was our goal, I went back to the studio and they were basically saying, well, thank you very much. We have our DVD, we're good. And that's, it's because the studio made all of its money in DVD at the time. So even the practicalities of finishing it for film wasn't there for the studio, because they got what they needed at the time. And in the years that followed, when high def came out, there was no HD version of it, even though we made sure to have all of the effects elements and everything created with the idea from the start that we're going to film, and archived with the idea that we will be returning to this. The studio decided to go to high definition, re-releasing as the film the original, not even the TV version, but the original theatrical version of the film. So it went back to that first assembly, first cut for years as the film. So Bob was with us, and I had some very long conversations with him. And at one point he sat me down in his kitchen and finally said, listen, we knew the director's edition would be back. And he said, no matter what, you need to always go back and make sure that we did eventually get it for film. And the fact is that there were a number of aborted efforts, but it didn't get to the point where we are today with technology that made it both cost effective as well to be able to do the job. And the evolution of where we are with technology is so superior to what would have been possible before. And I also had the wonderful privilege of working with Bob, showing him how technology had progressed and the earliest stages of what it would become HDR, where we've discovered that film had more information. And talking to Bob, our conversations were, don't hold the film back. Make sure that whatever tools are available, just because there's better tools, don't hold it back. It doesn't mean that we're going to have new digital CGI effects that are against the plan, but always let the film be told with the best tools that were available. So that enabled us to use Dolby Atmos for the sound and going back and have beautiful HDR grading. You also have to remember that back when they did the film, we said it was the first assembly and it was so rushed. They had 4 days to color grade the whole picture. And the idea was, since the even effects were coming in at that time, they had to make it balanced and even, so they didn't have the room to make it be captivating visually, because everything had to match and they didn't know if they would have to put things together. So that became the color grading forever. Also, the process in doing DVD is that you did your color grading first on the master before you did the work. So it wasn't until now, even in the direction that we did the work, that we were able to assemble a new negative of the film, which was my entire goal going back to the studio, was that we weren't creating a video master again. We weren't doing high def, we weren't doing a 4K master. We needed to generate a finished movie negative equivalent and theatrical sound master equivalent in order for the film to have the same rights as any other film in history. So we did do home sound mixes, but it enabled us to also go back and do the color grading at the end and really bring it to what it should have been from the start. So that's kind of trying to branch how we got to where we are today.
Yeah.
Where we were.
One thing that I've always been fascinated by watching the documentary on the 2001 version, and I'd love to talk to you about it now, was your ethos of when you're adding visual effects shots to the movie, you are making sure that they look as though they could have been created at the time by the collection of geniuses that were working on it in 1978 and 79. Was that still, obviously, I'm assuming so, that's still the ethos here?
Well, I think that
certainly was the start.
I think that less that gets misconstrued sometimes. I think what we were just going for at the time were two things. One was to not do crazy camera moves that CG suddenly made available, that we could actually obviously do things in the visual effects world that could not have been possible, because we didn't want them to jump out. Then also that the quality had to not be distracting and need to all blend. But I think also at the time, and we were discussing this just the other day, that the CG was kind of starting to go a little bit out of control when we first did the movie the first time. And people were pointing it out as being sort of detrimental. And so we wanted to just make sure that we were not doing that. And I think actually some of the stuff they'd done in the Star Wars special editions is as guilty of that as anything else at the time. And we just wanted to make sure we didn't go down that road, that the idea was to make a movie that if someone was watching it for the first time, they really wouldn't have the idea that we had done anything to it that hadn't been there originally.
It's basically a question of, in 2001, it was a question of style and tone. And to keep in mind the restrictions that the original crew faced in getting the shots that they wanted, because obviously they had the big ideas, and they had to find a way physically to get all these things done. And we wanted to keep that in mind when we were doing these new shots, to keep everything within that oeuvre, so to speak, and make sure that nothing jumped out, like Mike said, as being a wacky camera move or things that they never would have done in just terms of style. And of course, at the time, we were matching the look of the effects to horrible, in retrospect, transfer, just because that was the limitations of the transfer capability at the time. So we had to, basically dumb down a lot of our shots to fit and not jump out from the film as a whole. Now, coming back in 2022, that consideration was different, because we still wanted to match the quality of the film and have it link seamlessly with everything else. But because the quality of the transfers were so much better and so much more in depth, that created a whole bunch of new considerations that we had to go through to make everything look like it was one with the film.
Plus, we were
Part of that,
also
I just
used
wanna-
as a starting point was things that had been designed and storyboarded originally. We used that as a starting point. So it was, and we, in some cases, we found fully rendered paintings of shots that exactly like the V'ger bombs firing at Earth. Those were, we had the exact camera angles is what we used as the basis for our shots.
What I wanted to point out is Daren's referring to transfers, and part of what he means is that even when they made the film in '79, part of the major rush caused a lot of the shots to become soft when they were doing the assembly of the effects layers. And even the interpositives that we were working from, because you didn't work from negative at that time, would have dirt in the elements that were part of the duped elements because of the rush. This time, everything that we worked from was working. We were working from going back to the earliest element that we could find. So the film, when it's live action, those were scans from the camera negative, the original camera negative across the board. So we didn't have any of the flaws that were introduced because of the rush, except for a lot of the composited shots, and for roughly 80 to 100 shots that are in the film now, we were able to go back to those original scans of those negative elements and recombine them without the fuzziness, the flaws in those materials to make them even sharper and cleaner. There's never been a better look to the film because we've taken all of the potential problems or problems that were there and worked from their sources, and the results are stunning. But that's part of where what he's referring to is how
because
all
we
of
were in a very
problems,
different place.
before it, yes, it's fantastic, and the Paramount Archive just did a amazing job pulling out all of the materials that were
just the advancements in
relocated, at least.
scanning. Just the advancements in scanning technology anyway over the last, I mean, we were, I think we were only would have been to 2K maybe 20 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. So, and the scanning technology and and Dave, you know well, because you've been involved on the front lines of this, of how you can actually, the technology is such that you can actually find things in the film element that previous technology couldn't even ascertain as being there. We can now see.
And they were able,
I'm going to go into that for a second, Daren. The most amazing discovery for me about the whole film is that when you go back to the original camera negative, which, you know, the frame's there and this part is the image and the rest of the, I realized I'm flipped, but the rest of it is saved for audio when you do work. The original camera negative exposed all of it. And we found that we had about 20% of additional image on every negative frame, at least not the effects. And that was stunning because at least a few places we actually moved over and used a little bit more of that extra picture that would not have even been possible before. And we scanned the film in 4K. John Dykstra's team was working in VistaVision, which is a horizontal frame, which had to be scanned at 6K. And then, bless him, Doug Trumbull, rest in peace, his work was 65 millimeter, and that was scanned at 8K. So it's also a matter of taking all of this data and recombining it. And in some cases, Daren, did we end up combining Vista with 65 anywhere? I know that at the time there were some things they were trying to do, but it didn't work out all that well.
There's a couple of them that we were able to do. Yeah.
And then
I was actually referring, Dave, more about the technology of actually finding information in the film, not meaning the side of the film.
Well, HDR.
Yeah, I mean that, you know, and that whole process that's evolved over the last maybe decade and a half. It's just now we can actually see, you know, when you go back to the original elements, there's more there than you would get in the composite. There's more stars, there's more details on the model. So it, as I said before, it just put us in a completely different place this time, and you have to work harder because you don't have that degradation that can, for lack of a better phrase, can hide a multitude of sins. Now it's all just right there naked.
Yeah,
know?
it could give you a cushion to fall back on, whereas there's no cushion anymore. There's no
Right.
caddy.
So
Yeah,
what
I
you actually
understand
saw on set would be what was recorded on film, beyond what you ever would have experienced on film before, because it was actually in the film element, and that made it so much more satisfying to get
And
into
this
the
time,
experiment.
not the 4-day color grading, but more like 4 weeks.
Yeah. For
And I
weeks, I
understand
wish.
in some cases you were even able to add elements that were always meant to be there but weren't there. So, for example, the earth behind the Enterprise as it leaves dry dock is now an element that is included in the shot.
Yeah, there was a shot. There was the element that was coded for that shot, but just no time to put it in. And we found it. And I mean, I was blown away by the amount of scanning that was going on that the Paramount Archives teams were doing, and to actually, there was not even any time for I think one person. We had Gene Kazeki on it, but I mean, I don't know if one person's actually sat down and watched the many hours of material that came in. It just was mind blowing that the stuff exists, which it really shouldn't have. It was almost a fluke that it existed at all. But I mean, to actually see it and then make sense of it and figure it out and see just how much they did, it just blew your mind.
In that particular shot, the reason that the Earth wasn't used is the same reason that the support arm is still in the original release. As most people know, in the original theatrical release of the shot of the Enterprise coming out of dry dock, there is a noticeable black bar coming out from the side of the Enterprise that obscures the dry dock as it's coming out. And the reason that is still there is because they had no time to do a proper rotoscope to remove that. And without the rotoscope to remove that, they can't put the Earth in, because then the bar would go over the Earth too. So there was just no time to do it. And that's what we got. And thank goodness we had a little more time on this one to be able to make that. And it's one of my favorite shots.
But just seeing
That's
those
some of the
separate
joyful,
elements, it just was.
That's where there was special joy. It was a lot of joy to find things like that and just saw that they were on the right track. They knew what they were doing. They were putting it together, and to know that they had to abandon it just because of time and finally be able to get it back. And it wasn't our effects. It was their work being completed. That was just so rewarding. Whenever we found something tidbit like that, it was great.
And I mean, we took care of that armature problem last time, but but we ended up with a shot of the same quality. Now you feel like a fog has lifted in front of your eyes, and now you're seeing it in a much increased quality, and you're back to that incredible feeling that you have of seeing the Enterprise looking this good, and in this movie, which is really a movie that very few movies have done since then. It's actually a movie about how are we as human beings going to transform into being a spacefaring race? What's that going to do to us? Who do we have to be? Who do we have to become? What do we have to build? What's going to happen as a result? Very few movies go into that. And Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and I think that's why it maybe still it's held up very well, and why it's a favorite of so many people, is because it's really about that, and all of the visual effects that we did supports the power of that concept. And so now when I look at it, everything is just sort of amplified. It's the story, it was all about supporting the story and making it more powerful. The visual effects weren't improved just for the sake of improving it. It was always about the story.
Yeah.
I want to give, before we move on, one last thing I want to add to this is I want to give credit where credit's due. 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago now, almost 4, I started talking to the studio, and we basically decided we were going to do this, but we couldn't. The budget wasn't organized. I mean, we didn't have it set and locked in. But what they did internally, we just forever blessed. The archive started researching what materials were available, and they really started digging. And they spent the almost 3 years that it took, the 2.5 years that it took, before we actually started by doing all of that research and compiling a material. And just like the visual effects, they had so much material for us. The most amazing discovery ever was the ADR tracks. And if you want to go into this, Mike, it was another revelation that they really made the difference. The archive people were just fantastic. And to have spent so much time just to prep really helped this be what it needs to be. But the ADR was like magic.
Yeah, I don't know why
Mike?
we were so blessed with everything just existing, because it was one thing to get, camera negative scans and separations of visual effects elements to recomposite so that we could get a picture improvement. But, we knew we had multi-channel music. And I think on the last time I was on with you guys, I talked about Star Trek, the motion picture, the music restoration. And we had Bruce Botnick, at the time when we did the restoration of the music 10 years ago now. We did it in a certain way because there was the expectation that the director's edition would happen sometime soon. And he wanted to do a new mix at the time. I think we were just talking about 7.1. And there was a couple of moments, as Dave alluded to, where it kind of looked like the project was going to happen, and then it didn't. Administrations changed. The Viacom CBS, what we call the Faltorpan, had to happen, the refusion, to make it administratively possible. And then in the interim, the intervening decade, Atmos came on the scene. So now suddenly we are in a different place in terms of what we could do with audio. So we knew the music was going to be good. And I knew what sound elements existed for the finished film itself. And that was going to be okay. We had the sound effects libraries. We had the separate dialogue, finished dialogue mono stem that was done in 1979, and the raw audio from the added scenes that went into the TV version. But they then told us that they had all these other sound elements, more sound effects library stuff, and all of the ADR, which is automated dialogue replacement, euphemistically called looping, which is when the actors come in and re-record the dialogue in a clean studio, so you get the pristine quality.
Directed by Bob.
Right, all with Bob sitting in the booth with every single actor, getting the performance he wants, but it also had to perfectly match the lip sync, which would then go and be edited by Bill Varney, the dialogue editor, to place into the scene. But that put us in a tremendously different place, because if we were to stick with just the dialogue, how it sounded in 1979, you could only go so far with the sound effects and the music, because everything all three components have to blend with each other. But by having this absolutely first generation, the recording made in the ADR booth of the dialogue for most of the film, now we could go further with the quality of the music and what we could do with the sound effect. Now you can place voices around and give them a different perspective, and and then when you had Dolby Atmos, now with us for the past decade, now sort of the sky's the limit with what you could do with this thing, and that just I think it went farther than any of us were expecting in terms of its effectiveness of how the sound transformed this thing, because you just, when something's clearer, you're more engaged by it. And we noticed this with the audience screenings that we've had, first Paramount and then the Fathom events, that the audience is more engaged and you're paying more attention. When the sound is kind of muffled and dated sounding, you sort of kind of can tune out. But now the music is literally all around you and the dialogue is present. You're in the room with these people and you want to be in the room with these people, and you're interested in what they're saying and how they're reacting and looking at the facial expressions, and you're seeing the nuances of what Shatner and Nimoy and the other actors brought to the performances. It just comes alive. So without really changing the movie all that much, because the editorial changes are relatively minor. They really are relatively minor. It's a matter of the tone and the pacing and the rhythm of the tempo of it. That was, what Bob taught me, and I think he knew that we had an inherent sense of that. That's what we brought to it. but the sound just put us in a whole different level in terms of its effectiveness and its power and the experience of it, especially in a big theater.
It was also a conscious decision, as I mentioned earlier, that this was not making a 1979 movie that has to look and sound like 1979. This is still about the future. So the mix was designed to be on the level of what the best Dolby Atmos could be today, because that's the movie. It's telling the story. It's an active participant in telling the story. So it's a modern 2022 Dolby Atmos theatrical mix, as well as a modern 2022 Dolby Home Atmos mix that goes with it too.
Yeah.
So I'm excited. Just anytime anybody hears it, it just gives me chills of thrill, because that helped make the high points so much higher and the low points so smooth that it adds to the excitement and the peaks and valleys of the movie to just help it flow. And I'm thrilled when people say the film just works wonderfully for them now. And that's an active participant, everything that was to make it work.
Yeah, I want to bring Michael in because I'm aware I've been hogging the questions, but I did want to say that the sound is incredible. I've never heard the dialogue sound as wonderful as it does now, and the film. One of the reasons why the film captured me so much from the very first time I saw it is the original sound mix created so many really intense sonic environments. Sometimes I'm thinking about the wormhole sequence. The probe that takes Ilea. Some of these were sort of overpowering, enveloping experiences when I was watching it on a crappy TV in the 80s with one speaker. Now it really is quite astonishing what you've done with the soundtrack.
And those are sequences that you mentioned that the sound team really had to focus on. That's all they could really do at the time was focus on sequences, and a lot of Alan Howarth's sound effects went into the wormhole sequence. That was a very big thing that they focused on sonically, and it was basically locked scene, as was the probe on the bridge. It was so locked that it was a separate piece of film that Dave could talk about in order to achieve the effect of it. It was one locked piece of film that they could therefore finish the sound mix for. And we used that as a basis, but then of course used the other library stuff to enhance it, and then used what Atmos could bring to it to give it the power and the sense of threat. And that went hand in hand with what we were doing visually with HDR to, I know Dave's often talked about how it always felt like it switched to a different movie there. And so a lot of work went into visually that plasma probe scene of making it as good as possible, but the sound also
can now be motivated by the picture and the sound for the scene. That it looks like why we're seeing it that way is because of the probe, not somebody stopped the film, put in a shaky old grainy film.
A lot of the rest of it
didn't belong.
A lot of the rest of the movie was left alone, and they leaned very heavily on Jerry Goldsmith's score to carry it and disguise the fact that there were no sound effects there. And in particularly, the bridge of the Enterprise had a ton of sounds designed for it, and they were left with nothing because sound editors generally can't work until the cut is locked, and that happened so late that they had to just focus on these major sequences, as I said. But what was lost was the whole theme of the movie, because the threat in the story is technology. And I think this has just emerged as sort of like the primary theme in science fiction that keeps coming up, is that how are we going to get along with technology, and how are we going to integrate technology into us as a species? And you needed to always, Bob wanted you to always have that sense of technology being around you. And the conundrum is that we've built all this stuff, and it's supposed to, and we just want it to work right, and it's supposed to solve all our problems, but there's still something missing. We're still not somehow connecting right as people and solving our problems. And so you needed to have the threat of that. It's like, yeah, we built all these things. These computers are all busy doing that stuff. Why isn't it solving our problems for us? That was maybe sort of a bizarre concept in the late 70s when the movie opened. Now we're living it. Now that's our lives. Our lives is looking at screens and wondering, oh, what else is there besides what. So you've got, I think recently in the news I read about somebody, was it a JPL or somebody, where they were saying they had identified a computer server that having an emotion or having self-awareness. So, I mean, whether you're talking about the Philip Dick stories of Blade Runner and Total Recall, or even what Star Trek went on to do with the Borg and such, this theme just keeps coming up, of technology. 2001 really started it all, but technology becoming self-aware. Where is the line drawn? And, how can we integrate with technology without losing our humanity? That was the whole sort of theme that keeps coming up with this. And they made very few movies about it. But without that feeling that mankind, or I should say, and Federation allies have created this immense technology that can get us into space. You don't have a story. That your awareness of the technology has to be there the whole time. And so the sound design, again, was not just thrown in just because we want sound, but it was always about supporting the story and making it more powerful. I feel we've ended up with a movie that's 5 minutes longer than the 1979 version, but feels a lot shorter, moves a lot faster. There's a difference between something being slow and being deliberate. And Star Trek: The Motion Picture has a deliberate purpose. And once you kind of getting onto a freeway and the cars are all going at a particular pace, once you find that pace, you stick with it, and you keep the tempo and keep the rhythm. And that's how you get from place to place. And the movie is the same way. And if you look at all Bob's work, he was so attentive to that. He was very, very musical in that sense. I remember seeing him, look at the picture and count like this, and get the tempo and then go, here, cut. And then he would say 10, got to pull 10 frames out there. I mean, he had that kind of instinct. And that's why the movie, I think, works more powerfully, feels more engaging. All of these things, what we did with the visuals, what we did with the sound, what we did with the color, all of this works together in support of the story and in emphasizing the theme of this movie, which just sort of stands alone, still feels futuristic, and still feels like something that you want to shoot for and that you hope we can get towards, that we could actually achieve this in our future and go get over our own nonsense, which is filling the news headlines now, but that there's still a future worth fighting and coming together and going out into space, and that we actually could do this. And this movie, more than all the other Star Trek movies, focuses on that theme, and that's why to me it's so great. End of speech.
Yes. Michael, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I wanted to ask one particular question. I would be content to just sit back and listen to the four of you continue to talk, honestly. But if I'm being offered one question, as a child and growing up, being obsessed both with Star Trek and specifically the refit Enterprise, which was just the perfect distillation of this, or manifestation of this starship. I always understood it to be a ship of immense size, and we were never going to see all of it, and any part of it that we could see, in or out of context, it's a big ship. There's lots of rooms. So when we saw the original director's edition, you guys went in, and for what I now know is called the observation lounge scene, you added a nacelle outside the window that was in the original. The window was in the original shot. I was curious, Robert Wise, did he always want that set to be more sophisticated? Did he want it to be more elaborate? And that's something that you couldn't do with the resolution of the original transfer you received for the DVD. I guess what I'm asking is, you guys have done an elaborate redeco of that scene, that set piece, for the 4K edition. And was that something that you guys and Robert talked about together before you were able to finally do it in 4K?
Yeah, I'll let Daren finish the answer to this, but the fact is that there were boards that were designed, and there were designs for it to be that elaborate room, and it just wasn't possible. And Daren always wanted it and took it on as a blessing that he wanted to really work with that. So Daren, take it
Yeah,
up.
and there was a beautiful, was it by Mike Miner? Was it the color?
No, that was Andy
color.
Probert.
Andy Probert did this beautiful
Probert.
painting of what that set was supposed to look like.
Look, Robert Wise always wanted a connection between the interior and the exterior. You can see this on somewhat in the rec deck when we have the gathering of the whole crew. You can see out the windows in there slightly, and he always wanted to have a connection. And the thing is that it wasn't easy to do that back in '79. It was a little easier in 2001. And it was still difficult in 2022, but it was manageable. The thing that we had to deal with on the 2001 project was that to be able to cut out those figures in front of that last-minute set edition that they had to do to film that was beyond the realm of our budget and our time. So we did the best we could with putting the nacelle and another nacelle out the windows there, and it worked barely. The great thing about being able to go back on this version is that we had the capability of getting some very good rotoscoping cutout mats made, and to isolate the characters in the foreground from what we would replace the background. And the background is replaced with that shot of that big giant window room that we see Spock's shuttle approaching it. And it's the same plate, and it is exactly the same miniature that they shot. And I think it works great now. And I think that we were able to sort of establish an upper level of that lounge, and being able to show that it worked in the background without it detracting from the scene at all. And I think that it's subtle enough that it's not just, oh, look at these big engines out the window and look at the stars. I think that it works now as, oh, well, okay, this makes sense, and the scene is playing where it should.
It just fascinated. Sorry, go ahead.
Of those windows, the higher resolution scan of that plate made it so that we could enlarge it without having any difficulty of losing quality or having to generate it differently. Unfortunately, the actor pieces, those all that existed were from the composites from within the film.
Right.
And they had to be.
We never got the negatives of them in front of the blue screen.
Yeah, there still was a tremendous amount of material that was lost, even back to the point of, this is just an assumption, that when they sent it to the effects house to get the blue screen filled in with stars originally, maybe that material didn't make it back to the studio.
But even so,
we were negative elements. So we had to work with what was there. And when they originally did the effects, even the blue was drained out of the scene so much that their costumes turned gray. And we had to have someone go in and actually reintroduce the blue to bring the colors back.
Wow. And even so, it was just a window. That was a very, again, Daren said that was a very quickly done set. I don't know if they lost their set budget or they lost time, but they couldn't even build the lounge. It was a very quickly cobbled together. And that window, I think, is the same one that Decker and Ilea are standing in front of later, just moved to a different part of the set. So we still would have had to rotoscope beyond that, because we were opening up to put that whole bay of windows that's right behind the bridge dome, basically, where the shuttle docks. There's a command airlock up there with a lounge. So we still would have had to done work on it. It was difficult, but the point was we wanted to honor the original intent of the shot, which was to, for the first time in Star Trek, show a relationship between the interior and the exterior. And the fact that the people are very nonchalant about it. That's what's good, is they don't stop to look out the window and say, ooh and ah. It's like, this is just where they work, and, they just happen to have this view at the job. So, and it's like, do we get, by the 23rd century, that's just routine. Oh yeah, there's the engines, and we're at war. Big deal. You know, so that's the whole idea of Star Trek. Also, is
Mhm.
how nonchalant it's like.
Mhm.
People. Again, I go back to this. In the 70s, I don't think we really understood at a society level of technology being around us all the time.
Mhm.
And then, but now we're living it. I mean, I go to like CVS and you have these god awful self checkout things, you know, and then the cash registers are beeping up there, and there's an intercom saying one pharmacy call, and I'm like talking and beeping and beeping. It's around us all the time, and we've become conditioned to figuring out how to tune it out. And I could be doing this thing, and I have a phone over here doing something. You know, we manage it. When we first saw Star Trek, the idea that anybody would envision this, that Roddenberry would envision this society where you're interfacing with technology constantly, my mind is blown just retroactively going back to the 60s and thinking that someone actually envisioned that.
Mhm.
But we're living it now. So
Wow.
you know, that it's the nonchalance of being in front of that window that I think most impresses me about the officers' lounge. It's like, you know, they're just, this is where you have a meeting.
Yeah. I just want to bring in some of the great comments that we're getting. Michael Schaefer says, I never thought they'd be able to go back, and I'm so glad you gentlemen made the effort. Mark D.
It
with a
really did
C.
make a difference that everybody called out for so much. I told the
Yeah.
studio that it was almost every day, if not every week, a few times, somebody always asked. And that is why it happened, guys. You did it. You gave me what it needed to tell them. So thank you.
Mark D. with a C says, absolutely love this version. The director's cut is phenomenal, and the new 4K restoration is amazing. Been waiting for this for years.
Thank you.
And here's a fun question. You might have had this a few times before. Was there any consideration given to trying to recreate or finish the scene from the early script in which Kirk and Spock fight the crystal things, which was test shot and even in the Marvel comic?
Let me quickly address it in the sake of saying it wasn't working. The set wasn't working. The costumes weren't working, and there was no point for that scene to be in the film. So it was abandoned in lieu of Spock's spacewalk, which even is different uniform, different spacesuits. It worked so much more, and it belonged in the film. Those scenes, while interesting, there's no way that they would be back in the film in any ways. There was no consideration given to trying to, plus whether or not the elements exist was
I think if we found the scene,
so,
we
no.
probably would have done something with it for fun, but not for
but
going
certainly
back
not in the movie.
Not in the movie.
Not in the
no.
movie. There was no
And
way.
you got, and also novelizations and comic book adaptations have to be finished, obviously, and ready for publication
Months
in
ahead.
advance.
Yeah.
So that's why those that memory wall sequence, as it's known, was in those things, but not in the finished movie, which was, you know, you've seen, if you had the DVD, some of the shots of what that memory wall set looked like, and Doug Trumbull, you know, was observing at that time,
Rightfully.
and just said, you know, this is really not working, and it was very painful conversation he had to have with Bob. I think, Daren, you told this story about how that was one of the most painful professional things he's ever had to do, was say it's not working, right, but would you let me have a crack at coming up with something different? Very 2001-like Odyssey sequence with this brilliant work of Robert McCall coming in to transform it into one of the most mind-blowing sections of that movie, but still to this day holds up. I don't recall, other than in things, you know, occasionally. And I mean, I think Doug tried it again in Brainstorm, maybe, you know, things in like Contact or a few other films. But very rarely do we anymore get these kind of mind-blowing, you know, totally abstract sci-fi sequences. And when you put it together with, you know, what Jerry did with the music, you know, it still just stands out as, my God, this is such a unique movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the difference between, you know, those original shots from the memory wall, looking, you know, very, very clumsy and not working either story-wise or you know, scope-wise. And you know, as Mike said, Doug found it incredibly difficult to, you know, pull Bob to the side and say, you're not going to be able to get a decent sequence out of this, and we need to try something else.
Yeah. So we're coming up on our hour. Do you have any time
to move on if you want to? Yeah, we do. I know I can say
10 more minutes for me.
So
10 more minutes.
That works.
Okay.
For Daren, we can see how we can go.
Okay. Michael, did you have another question here?
Conrad, I am just enraptured. At this point, I don't want to even interrupt the proceedings. Conrad, please continue. I'm just like this. I feel like that Leonardo DiCaprio meme where I'm just like,
oh my goodness.
Well, you mentioned Jerry's score, Mike. It really is a phenomenal score. It's never sounded better than it does now on the Dolby Atmos track, especially that blaster beam.
Yeah, we were so blessed to. I mean, we've been working with Bruce since 2008, and I mean, it's just have to have that direct connection to Jerry. I mean, we'll sit in his studio and Bruce will start talking to Jerry. Whenever we're working on this, and at the mix, wherever, I always put this great photo of Bob and Jerry that was taken at the Hollywood Bowl in 2001. I make sure that they're there with us. Bruce just knows, if in the absence of Jerry, that's the guy. And so, and he's been on the cutting edge of mixing music for Atmos. And working with the engineers that are, designing that and trying to market it and sell music in the Atmos format. And he's gone back to, the recordings he made with the Doors from the 1960s and has the multi-channel and is making Atmos. I mean, it's, so it was an amazing thing. And so, having him be able to do that. And I don't think we've ever had a movie that was made this long ago that's gone back to the multi-channel music for the Atmos mix. Yeah. I think that's actually, that's a first. That's a first. I mean, it's not a lot of tracks. It's 12 tracks, but I mean, we were able to place things around the room, and I just hope that we have more opportunity to really get this theatrical Atmos mix heard by more people, because it is just stunning. It is just absolutely stunning.
And the film is available for booking, so places are making those that are taking advantage of that.
Yeah, there are people reaching out.
I know in UK it's happening. I know in Canada they're having a showing this week. There's going to be some closer to the anniversary, and if the theaters are Atmos, you're going to hear something truly special. This was completing post. It wasn't like we were trying to squeeze something out of the music or otherwise that would be unusual for the time. It was, we reopened everything, and just like it had been recorded, finishing it.
And as I said, through just a series of flukes, we happened to have everything that you would need, well, almost, other than the production audio. We had everything that you would normally have if you were mixing a newly made movie. So it really was that. We did use, to a degree, certain sequences, the 6-track mix that had been done in '79 as sort of like a foundation or a bed, and built on it. But by and large, I'm sorry to invoke the tagline, but there's no comparison. I mean, the dialogue and the bridge sound, just in the average bridge scene, is one thing when you look at it in '79, or even the mix of the music. And it's a totally different thing now, even though the scene itself may not have changed, but there of course are a lot of changes. And just looking at it again this week, in particular, when the Enterprise first encounters the cloud and V'ger first fires at them, that whole sequence, I just forgot just how many editorial changes there were there. It's very, very, very different, and it's incredible to me how much more powerful it ended up being, with just some very careful corrections and shortening, tightening, moving a few things around, adding the scene, of course, which was the number one scene that Bob wanted back in the picture, was Ilea taking away Chekhov's pain, which we then had the blessing of a piece of unused music that we could use there. And then we're very attentive to what was going on with the surrounding sound effects at that moment. So suddenly you go from something that just sort of sits there in an assembly of footage to something that's alive and engaging and with people that you care about. That transformation, which is the Robert Wise influence on all of us, going back to his early career and his just instincts as an editor that was, spotted by Orson Welles and Val Lewton and a lot of prominent people at the time at RKO, was continuing to live and in the work that we brought to it. And that's why the whole thing at the end is dedicated to Bob, because it was his influence on us that was driving this whole thing.
Conrad, do you have something that we can give to that we can ask Daren? I mean, I don't want to, before we lose his brilliance here, I want to get more on the visual effects and focus, because I know he has to leave imminently. So is there something about the visual effects that we can address? And
well,
it looks like Mike and I can say, let's focus.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, is there a particular shot that you found challenging in this version or in the 2001, either technically or conceptually? Was there something that was a real bear?
Everything is difficult and everything is easy, depending on how much time you're given and how much emphasis is placed on it. I think that the one difficult shot, because we had very little to go on for it, was the reveal of V'ger at the end, with it approaching Earth and the cloud dissipating. Because while they storyboarded it extensively, they never quite figured it out. As we were developing that shot for the 2001 version, it was tough, because you see you're balancing scale and perception, and this is the first time that you get to see the whole thing. And up till now, we've only seen tiny bits and pieces of it, with the tiny Enterprise in the foreground. So it's as the Enterprise is shown huge at the beginning of the film, and you gradually see it get smaller and smaller on its journey until it's dwarfed literally by V'ger. When V'ger is finally revealed to be a thing that can fit in the whole frame, finally, it's a bit of a shock transition. And the thing was that we wanted to be able to show enough of the sections that were recognizable from the trip over V'ger, and be able to show it in its full glory without making it just look silly and having the audience be let
small.
down. Yeah, exactly. So I think we found a really good way of portraying that back in 2001. And the new version is exactly the same camera move, but we had a lot of other considerations regarding color depth and detail and what to show and what not to show. And it's a tricky thing, but I think it looks good, and there's just enough of that sort of Doug Trumbull magic to carry it through. We were just obviously standing on the shoulders of giants and able to reach much farther this time. And I'm happy with how it finally came out. And but it was a tough one getting from there to here.
And if I might just throw in one more question.
Job.
If I might throw in one more quick question about the effects, I'm sure it'll be a short answer, but I'd love to know, when you guys did the 2001 DVD, you finally gave us a star field behind the opening credits, and you made the opening credits more unique. They weren't just white Trek font; they were gold, right? They were embossed.
Woody Allen.
Well, in this case, we now have, from what I noticed, and I tried to go back and compare, the font now kind of shimmers and has kind of a shiny, almost the light moving across the embossed edges effect. What was the decision there to enhance that even further? Was that just to make it feel really special, or? I wanted
to. This was a something that I'd been thinking of a long time, like almost 20 years. But it was something to sort of make it not look like just the same old cutout letters that we're used to somehow take advantage of the higher resolution, higher light to dark ratio, and to give it something, a little tie-in with the rest of the movie. And what I came up with was to give it, the outline shimmer. And what it turns out that I used was that pattern behind there is a couple of the mores from the V'ger transformation. So it's actually foreshadowing that sort of light dance in the opening titles. And it's something no one's ever going to notice, but maybe it works a little
subconsciously.
You see this strange dance of light across it, and it's interesting to watch, and it isn't distracting, but it sort of gives you a feel of something that may happen later. And I think I'm very happy with that. I'm very happy with that.
Was this something, Daren, that you had any idea what it was going to look like, or did you just try it and let me see what this does?
I had a pretty good idea of what it was going to look like, because it's also related to, in a strange way, the Force ghost that Obi-Wan is in Return of the Jedi, because that also has that kind of it's like a water ripple pattern behind him in the outline. And I was thinking along those lines to sort of make it a little more interesting visually, and that's where the actual inspiration came from.
Plus, this time around, the goal is that we knew we were making the film element, and even in different places where you have on-screen subtitles, they're smaller because the venue is designed for theatrical. We weren't doing home entertainment, so to make the credits more alive on a giant screen is mature and belongs with this film. Whereas on standard definition, what we had was the best it was going to be for that size screen. I think the result now works where it wouldn't even be noticeable for standard definition. So for the overall idea of us looking at it as the bigger film and the bigger delivery, Daren was certainly delivering credits that matched that overall goal that we had.
Yeah, it looks amazing. I was just noticing the fact that even those opening credits, which I thought were perfect in the first director's edition, were also not left as they were. They were given more attention, which I thought was fabulous. So yeah,
that was a fine line, because I know I think there are fans of the Woody Allen credits out there.
Sure. Really?
I remember hearing, how much money this movie was going to cost, right? Even as a kid reading about it. And we'd all seen Superman, the movie, the previous December, with those incredible animated and memorable credits. And then we get to the $44 million Star Trek, the motion picture, and we get the simple credits. And again, it does have fans, but many credit sequences were actually storyboarded, but for both the contractual reasons of the timing and placement of the credits and the fact that we didn't want to distance ourselves too far from what the opening of the movie really was, but we needed to do something. And so that was kind of like the compromise. They did do some very elaborate, outlines and sketches of potential credits and one of them actually was very similar to Star Trek 4, where the cloud would start dissolving into the frame before the credits finished. And we thought, well, we can't do that because it's like they did that later in Star Trek 4, almost the same exact thing.
Right.
So this was a very carefully considered thing with Bob, where we didn't want to stray too far, but we wanted to make it known from the outset that this is a finished version of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And we had the technological benefit of being able to do it, within our budget, within the space that was allowed. So if if you're going to do comparisons and try and look and see what's different in addition to the credits, good luck, because just about every shot in the film has had some way touched this time around.
Before I go, I just
wanted the live action not.
I just wanted to give a shout out to the crew that we had working on the visual effects this time. We were very lucky to get back a bunch of the people that we had working on the project 20 years ago, and including Mojo and Dave Morton, John Teska, several of the other people that really did a great job back then. And I was so glad to get them back this time. And we got a bunch of newcomers who are all excellent artists in themselves. And Mojo was able to bring in a really good crew that did amazing work, and all under separate roofs. This was all remote work, and that brings
Perfect COVID movie.
And
Yeah.
it was a COVID. Yeah, I mean, we
Brings
hardly
a
saw
lot
each other through the whole thing.
It brings a lot of problems that you don't normally have to deal with one facility. But I think that everyone did an amazing job, and I'm so proud of all of them.
Yes, bravo to the VFX team.
Absolutely. Before you go, Daren, is your inner child 12 now or 13? Today's Darren's birthday.
Yeah, today's
Happy birthday, Daren.
Yeah.
My
Happy birthday,
inner
Daren.
child does not age.
I just meant again.
This aging husk grows old around it, but I'm feeling okay, and I'm certainly I feel young, as Admiral Kirk might have said.
Yes.
And I'm so glad to have been able to participate in this, which has taken up big chunks of my life so far. So I'm very, very glad to have been able to do that.
And we were blessed to have you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks so much for joining us.
All of the contribution, and good luck with the new place, and all the best. Many happy returns.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Okay.
Darren.
Take care, buddy.
Okay. Well, I don't want to keep you guys much longer. I just thought to finish off, I would ask, many people may have seen the film already on Paramount Plus, but not in the UK, because for some reason it's not available here, which is frustrating.
Oh, politics.
I do hear you have a theatrical coming soon.
Yes, I am very much looking forward to that. But there's also going to be a 4K Blu-ray release, and I was wondering if you had any details on extras that people might be looking forward to experience there.
Well, let me tell you, once they announce it.
Yeah, you're a little early.
I actually tried to get permission to give you some info, and I was told have to bite our tongues. But the only thing I'll say is that I did mention on StarTrek.com early when Paramount Plus was coming out that thanks to the ADR, a deleted scene we found back 22 years ago without audio was now able to be finished because of the lines were actually looped. Having said it back then, one could assume that something like that would be seen.
Okay. So there are lots of goodies to look forward to. We just can't say what they are yet.
I am absolutely thrilled with what's coming up. It's what so many people have dreamed and asked about and wanted. And as I said, the whole project has happened because of the fans, and we listened. And I think everyone's going to be very, very happy.
I can't wait. I can't wait.
Me neither.
Yeah, and I mean, apart from anything else, to have the thing physically with the Atmos track on it, is the way to go if you're a fan of this movie.
Yeah.
I will say that, as I said earlier, even in this, when we did the film, we did a theatrical Dolby Atmos track and a theatrical Dolby 5.1 track. And we, the filmmakers, did a home Dolby Atmos track and a home 5.1 track. So you're going to have what we had designed and assembled at the same time, not a reduction from the other.
And I have to say, with all gratitude to Paramount Plus, whose arrival on the scene helped spearhead this, that it also created a monster. Because when we did a tech screening in Atmos and then subsequently a big event at Paramount with an audience, and then the Fathom screenings, the movie theater, which we'd all gotten used to staying away from for a long time, is the natural habitat for this movie. There's just something about it that it's so invested in the concept of the Starship Enterprise as being this big, complicated thing, which then goes off into space and discovers this impossibly big and complicated thing, that for that story, I just want it to be on a screen that's taller than I am. And so, having been blessed to be seeing it in big theaters recently, since we finished, I'm just like, God, we just have to get back to the movies. I'm just looking so forward to getting, the Paramount screening was great, just to see how engaged and how much fun everybody was having and how good it looked and sounded. I'm like, this is just where it belongs. So I hope that there's more opportunities for that. Certainly, fans of the movie will want to own what's coming, to have at what will hopefully be good pictures and sound systems in the home. But I hope that this reminded me of just how much I missed going to the movie theaters, and it's unique. As I said before, it's unique. This movie feels a little bit kind of like an old style IMAX movie that's about space or science, or like the Cinerama movies from the 50s and 60s. There was something, a little bit of a spectacle element. This is, a lot of it is about the ship and space travel and exploration and the people that work there. And it's not just, a shoot 'em up. The shoot 'em ups are fine and they're fun. But this one is really about, when you go sit in a big theater, it's like you really grasp the scope of the technology that we're talking about here, this futuristic technology of space travel. When you're, and what, the wormhole sequence is like, this is really like, this is an occupational hazard. This could happen if the balance of this technology to make warp travel feasible isn't quite working right, and just all these things of the navigation of space, all of that. It comes so much more alive on the big screen, and then to just be able to see the original cast, who felt old to us at the time when we saw them in the movie. It's like, oh my God, they've all gotten old. Now they look so young and so good. And to spend time with that cast, in a big epic scale movie like this, it's just aged so well, just like the finest wine. It's just aged so well. And I look forward to many more opportunities to experience it with an audience on a big screen.
Conrad,
gentlemen, I'm sorry, gentlemen. I just want to say something real quick. I have to give up my seat for another event that's on a different channel here in a minute. But I just wanted to say, before I bow out a little early, I just want to thank you both for the work you've done. I've followed you guys, seen you on interviews, especially on the Director's Edition DVD for 20 years. I'm a massive Star Trek fan. It has been a privilege to talk to you both today, as well as Daren. I can't believe I've actually sat here for 90 minutes being able to talk with you guys.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah,
Thanks, Michael.
I love your work, and I wish you all. It's a selfish wish, but I hope you guys keep working on more Star Trek projects because I want to see them. So thank you again, and I will see you guys out there in the universe. So
thank
Michael. You all.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thanks, Michael. Well, I'll just finish by...
Conrad, can I... Well, go ahead.
Oh, what
I
was
was
that
just going to
comment?
say, there was a comment from Michael Schaefer here. Saw this on the big screen back in May, and it was the best the Enterprise has ever looked. So just to echo your thoughts on, this is the natural habitat for this movie.
And
Sorry.
in the future, as we have VR and other systems to watch films, at least we'll have the impression of it as giant as it is on the big screen. It lacks the communal experience of knowing the person next to you is having just as much of a great experience as you are. But at least for scope and the massive scale of it, we'll hopefully be able to see more of it that way. Conrad, you made a comment earlier that I really want to share something that's personal, that means a lot to me about what the fans have been saying. And it's unique. And I can't tell you how surprised I am that I keep getting the same comment from people. And it's a unique comment. And it's everyone with this version. And it means so much to me with the 2022 completed Director's Edition. There are so many people who are watching it and saying, it brought back that experience of seeing it the first time as a kid. And it's crazy when you think that it's a movie that we've been watching for over 40 years and we've seen it in many different versions, but to have it bring back that original feeling means so much to me that we really made it be what it needed to be. And I think, Bob, I'm excited because it almost takes away those 40 years of what is this? And it brings back to, as Doug Drexler amazingly said, and I'll never forget this, this is the movie we always dreamt the movie was what we wanted. And if we've reached that goal, then I'm speechless. But so surprising to have that same statement without everybody knowing each other. Everyone making that same statement touches me amazingly, and I'm sure Bob is thrilled where he is.
I also got, did you get this, Dave? People say, oh my God, I cried. Oh my God, I related so much to it. I got those kind of comments, and that I don't think we were really expecting. It was like, okay, yes, let's make it look as good as look and sound as good as it can. But I don't know that I was quite ready for that kind of transformation where it would really
And it's resonating with teenagers and 20-somethings, and it's really working for everybody on every scale. In some ways, I think the story is more relevant today than it was back then, but people are seeing it for the first time. And I want to encourage everybody to show it to everybody else. You guys asked for it, we got it. Now it's time to share it with the people you love. Somebody else said, I don't have to make any excuses for the film anymore because people are loving it first time. Well, let's tell them. Let's make sure that we give it away for the holidays. They did say it's coming out in September. That much information they announced. But give it to family members because you want them to have the experience. Tell people about it. Our job was to get it for you as you asked for it. Work with us to make sure everybody gets a chance to see it because it's working with it and it's a great gift for everybody. Share your love.
It absolutely is more relevant. It speaks more to today's world. As for all the reasons I mentioned before, I also think there's something maybe young people are not realizing it until they see a movie like this, that we're so numbed by lots of things where, people are fighting and punching and flying around and blowing stuff up for an hour and a half. And it's so noisy that what a dream to actually have a movie that takes its time and gives you a moment to actually observe what's going on. And to be exposed to music like this, when the marketing team came to the screening we did, it's like, I realized they're not used to hearing movie scores like this. So many comments about how great the music was. Yeah, because everything you're having to sit through now doesn't have music like that anymore. So, it's a unique, one-of-a-kind experience with a lot of power, and all the work we put into it was all about, helping it be as powerful as it could be.
Well, you've absolutely achieved that in spades. It is, the movie you remember it was and more, and I hope everybody takes the opportunity to go and see it in a big theater if it's available near them, and if it isn't, they should lobby people to make sure that
absolutely
it is.
Lobby. Go to your theater chains. Yeah, absolutely.
It's available. No one can tell you it's not. It's available worldwide for the asking.
Okay. Well, I'll just finish now by saying again a big thank you to both of you and Daren, of course, for joining us and sharing your experience and your thoughts and feelings about this film. You've done incredible work, and we're blessed to have you come and talk about it. So thank you.
And thank you. And thank you to everybody attending the convention, and have a great time.
Thanks very much, guys. Bye for now.
Okay. Yes, take care.